I told the flight attendant that the man 2 rows behind me had been dead for 4 years, and that I had his death certificate in my wallet. She smiled the way people smile at a problem they have decided to outlast, and asked if I wanted water. I did not want water. I wanted someone with a badge to walk down that aisle and make him say his own name out loud. Nobody did, because nothing about him looked wrong. And that was the whole problem. It started with coffee, which is the dumbest sentence I have ever said about the worst day of my life. He ordered it black. No sugar. And then he added the thing my husband always added. That small clipped apology for being any trouble at all. Wesley used to break his sentences half a beat early, in a place nobody else broke them, like a man checking the ground before putting his weight on it. I have spent 12 years writing down the exact words of strangers in courtrooms. And I will tell you something about faces and voices. A face can be starved, sunburned, aged, grown over with a beard. But a voice keeps its rhythm the way a river keeps its bend. I did not turn around for 11 minutes, because I sat there counting my own breathing until my hands were steady enough to trust. When I finally looked, I did not look at his face. I looked at his left hand on the armrest. There was a wedding band on it, turned inward, the gold pressed into his palm so only a thin line showed. My husband wore his ring that way for 12 years, and no man does that by accident. I sat back down, pressed my hands flat against my thighs for 3 hours, and told myself grief can build a dead man out of nothing, knowing the whole time that I was lying. We landed, and I stayed in my seat while the entire cabin stood and shuffled around me, because I needed the aisle empty, and I needed him to move first. When he finally rose and turned, we looked directly at each other for 1 full second across the width of a commercial airplane cabin, and neither of us breathed. It was the face I had written a eulogy for, thinner now, sun-worn, carrying 4 years of somebody else's weather. But it was his face, and it knew mine. He looked away first, and that told me more than any confession could have, because a man who has never seen you before has nowhere in the world to look away from. I did not scream, and I did not grab his sleeve. And I need you to understand that the calm was not strength. The calm was 12 years of training. In depositions, you learn that you never ask a witness the most important question first. You let him talk. And you let him feel safe the whole time he is talking. So I stayed 20 feet back through baggage claim. And he pulled his bag off the carousel with that same short hitch in his shoulder from the rotator cuff he tore the year we married. A blonde woman stepped in beside him and set her hand on his elbow the way you only do when you have been doing it every single day for years. That was what opened me up. Not a kiss. Not anything you could point at in a photograph. Just how ordinary they looked, laughing together like 2 people with nothing to hide. They boarded a resort shuttle at the curb, and I asked the driver whether that was the lake property with the boathouse. And he said, "Yes, ma'am. Best view on the water. Checking in today." And I told him I was, because I had booked that exact resort 8 weeks earlier. I called Garrett Voigt from the hotel room with the lake going black outside the window. And I read him the facts, the way I read back testimony. He had been our family lawyer for 11 years, and he had sat beside me in probate the morning the judge signed the presumption of death. When I finished, the line went so quiet that I pulled the phone away from my ear to see whether the call had dropped. Then he said my name once, carefully, the way a man says your name right before he takes something away from you. "Delaney, if that is Wesley, you are not describing a miracle. You are describing a man who let this state issue a death certificate in his name." I had not thought of it in those words yet, because I was still standing in the part of it where my husband was simply alive. Garrett kept going anyway, because he is the kind of lawyer who would rather hurt you early than let you get hurt later. He told me the carrier could rescind the policy, claw back every dollar of it, and ask the court to unwind everything that had flowed from that signature. Then he asked me where the money had gone, and I had to say it out loud to a man who already knew the answer. All of it went into the last 2 years of my mother Marguerite's life. into a room with a window and a woman who brushed her hair every morning. The next morning, I went down to the front desk with a small, ordinary lie about a charge I did not recognize on my folio. The clerk was maybe 22 and eager to help, and he turned the monitor toward me for 2 full seconds before he caught himself. The reservation was not under Wesley Kirk. It was under Wade Sutter, a name I had never heard spoken in my life. A man does not wake up one morning with a different first name, a different last name, and a card on file at a resort. I stood there with my hand flat on that counter, understanding that a thing like this takes years, and it takes somebody else's money. I found Rosalind Farrell alone on the dock the next morning, and I want to be honest that I did not go down there to fight her. I went because I needed to look straight into the eyes of a woman who had no idea what she was standing in the middle of. She was easy in a way I was not prepared for, laughing before I finished my sentence, offering me half her coffee like we were old friends. She runs the trip schedule for a river outfitter, and she has the hands of somebody who has actually pulled a rope. And I hated how much I liked her inside of 5 minutes. She goes by Roz, and within 20 minutes she was talking about her boyfriend, the way happy women do when they are waiting for any excuse. 2 years together, she told me, and he was a widower. No children. A man who had come out west to get away from the memory of a wife he lost back east. I asked my questions soft and slow, the way you draw out a witness who wants to help you, and she filled every silence I left open. She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures because she was proud of him, and I sat there scrolling through a life I had been dead inside of. Him on a trail. Him at a table at some anniversary dinner with his left hand flat on the wood and the wedding band turned inward. Gold pressed into his palm, showing nothing but a thin line. Then she said something quieter, and her voice changed just enough that I stopped breathing. Every few months, an envelope comes for him, and he never opens it in front of her. Not once in 2 years. She asked him about it one time, and he lied to her so smoothly, so kindly, that she never asked again. And she said she was ashamed of that. I told her it was nice to meet her, and I meant it. And I walked up that dock with my hands shaking. Not from jealousy, because jealousy would have been simple. My husband was not just hiding. Somebody was paying him to stay dead. Wesley knocked on my door after midnight, and I stood on the other side of it with my hand on the chain for a long time before I moved it. He did not reach for me, and he did not apologize. And I think if he had opened with an apology, I would have shut the door in his face. He said the only sentence that could have gotten him into that room, which was that everything I believed about his death was only half true. So I let him in, and I sat down across the little table by the window with my arms crossed. And I told him to start talking and not stop until I understood all of it. He talked for 2 hours. And in all 12 years of our marriage, I had never heard his voice sound like that. He was inspecting a bridge deck on a project running on federal highway money. And the concrete strength reports coming back from the testing lab did not match what he was pulling out of the field cores. He said he flagged it in writing. Twice. And the second time, a man he had never met sat down across from him and did not threaten him once. He just talked about the coffee place I stopped at every Tuesday morning, and the exit I took to the courthouse. And then he shook Wesley's hand and left. Nobody ever said a single word you could take to a police station. Delaney. That was the entire point of how they did it. And I sat there listening to a dead man explain the mechanics of my own commute back to me. Then he told me about the water. The boat he capsized on purpose in a stretch of current he had studied for a month. The life vest he cut loose where he knew it would wash up. A body that would never surface. He said, because there was never going to be a body. I did not believe him. Not all the way. Because grief does not unlock itself just because a man hands you a story shaped exactly like the hole in you. So, I asked him the only question that mattered, which was why he never came back once it was safe. And he looked at the carpet and said nothing at all. He put a small drive on the table and a folded page of handwritten names and contract numbers, and he walked out like a man paying off a debt nobody had come to collect. Owen Brandt knocked on my door at 8 the next morning with a badge from the carrier's fraud unit and the manners of a man who had done this 100 times. He did not raise his voice, and he did not threaten me. And somehow that was worse, because he simply explained that a routine biometric match on a passport under the name Wade Sutter had flagged against Wesley Kirk's old license photo. The claim file had my name on it, so his road led straight to my door. He told me the company would be opening a fraud investigation, regardless of how sympathetic the circumstances turned out to be. Then he set a single sheet of paper on the table between us and asked me if I recognized the name at the top. It was a payment schedule. Not a lump sum. Nothing dramatic. Just steady deposits into an account belonging to Wade Sutter, running 4 years without a break. Funded through a materials testing firm out of Boise. And at the top of that page was the name of the man who signed for it. Hollis Rademacher. And I felt my whole body go cold in a hotel chair on a bright morning. I did not go cold because I read that name. I went cold because I had typed it. 6 years ago, I sat in a conference room with a rattling air conditioner and took the deposition of a construction materials contractor named Hollis Rademacher. And I certified that transcript with my own seal and my own signature. I remember the sound of his voice. Low and patient. A man who never rushed an answer. I gave the state a clean, certified record of a man swearing that his testing results were sound. And that record is the door that closed on my husband before he ever got near it. Wesley walked into a wall built partly out of my own work. Nobody threatened me, and nobody bribed me. And I still helped bury him. I found Wesley at the railing above the water that afternoon, and he did not deny one word of it. Not the envelopes. Not the deposits. Not any of it. He said he took the money because refusing it would have told them he was still alive, and he had convinced himself that cashing those checks was how he kept me safe. So I asked him what my mother's last 2 years were worth. Since he was so good at pricing things, he said her name once, and then he could not finish the sentence. What you call protection, I told him, was just a price you agreed to pay with somebody else's life. And mine was the life you spent. The file moved from the carrier to the federal side inside of 3 weeks. Because Owen Brandt did not sit on it, and Garrett Voigt did not let anyone pretend I was a suspect. Roz Farrell walked into that interview on her own, without a lawyer and without being asked twice. And she handed over the photographs and every tracking number off those envelopes she had quietly written down for 2 years. She told the agents she was not doing it to hurt anybody. She said she had spent 2 years being the last person in her own life to know the truth. And she was done being that woman. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. Hollis Rademacher was indicted on wire fraud, false statements on a federally funded project, and obstruction, and the government seized what they could reach before his lawyers got moving. Wesley pled to a federal false statement charge, cooperated fully, and stood in a courtroom in a gray suit that made him look like a stranger to me. The judge gave him real time, not probation, not community service, because a reason you can understand is still not a reason that erases anything. He was ordered to pay restitution, and he lost his engineering license permanently, and he did not once ask the court for mercy. I sat in the second row, and I did not cry. The carrier rescinded the policy and came after every dollar of the payout, exactly the way Garrett warned me they would on that first phone call. But you have to understand what they were actually taking back, because it was never money to me. It was 2 years of a room with a window, and a woman brushing my mother Marguerite's hair every morning while she forgot my name and smiled at me anyway. Garrett negotiated a repayment agreement with no criminal exposure, no charge, no admission, and he did it in under a month. I sold the house to pay it, and I signed the deed without one tear, because that house was never mine. That house belonged to a lie. Hollis Rademacher got the longest sentence of anyone in this story, and his firm lost its certification, and the state pulled every project his labs had ever signed off on for review. Wesley writes to me from where he is serving his time. Steady letters, once a month. And I have answered exactly one of them. I told him I forgive him. And I told him I am not coming back. And that those two things are not the same river. Roz Farrell sent me a card from wherever she landed. 3 lines. No return address. And we are not friends, and we are not enemies. We are just 2 women who survived the same man. Garrett Voigt refused to bill me for the last 4 months of work. And when I pushed him on it, he told me to buy something for the new place instead. Owen Brandt called me the day he closed the file. And he did not have to, because the carrier had already gotten every dollar back. He told me he has watched a lot of people lose money in his career, and that almost none of them stand up straight while it happens. I live in a small apartment near the water now, and I am back in the courtroom with my machine, taking down other people's words the way I always have. There is a man named Cal who fixes boat engines 2 docks down, and one morning he asked to borrow a pen, and then he asked me another question, and then another. 4 years ago, I buried a man I loved, and this time I buried the life I am never getting back, not with grief, but with something a whole lot closer to peace. I don't say this often, but a piece of me is in this one. If you have ever had to set something down that you swore you'd carry forever, I hope you find your quiet the way I found mine. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every comment, and I'll see you in the next one.